Hello everybody, how are you? I hope all of you are fine. Today I want to talk about words and word structure. The topic is word and word structure. Phonemes can combine and recombine to make words. And you know that the word is composed of different phonemes. So the words themselves have an internal structure and can even be ambiguous based on this structure. For example, does the word, unlockable means able to be unlocked or not able to be locked? It can actually mean both, and it depends on how you build the internal structure of the word. Morphology is the study of structure of words. Here, when I say the title is word and word structure, it means we're going to study morphology. Morphology deals with what rules guide how they can and can't be built. Many words are made of smaller, meaningful parts that aren't actually words. Things like on, ness, or anything else. These are called morphemes. Morphemes are any set of sounds that carry meaning or can carry a grammatical function. Meaning or grammatical function. Morphemes are any set of sounds that carry meaning, so while suffixes and prefixes are morphemes, so are whole words like cat and dog. They are like the whole word. The word like cat and dog is composed of just one morpheme. On and ness, two prefix and suffix respectively, are morphemes too. Language vary a lot with respect to how they allow words to be built, and linguists have identified a number of different types of languages with respect to their morphology. It means we have a different language which their differences is just different in morphology. In some, like Mandarin Chinese, most words are composed of a single morpheme. These are sometimes called isolating languages. Because why isolating? Because each morpheme is isolated, or this language is composed of different or set of isolated morphemes. Other languages like Sora, spoken in India, have words that incorporates lots and lots of morphemes. In some of this type of language, word can be very long and actually encode meaning that correspond with whole phrase in another language. Some languages have a lot of morphemes that can get added by more or less sticking a morpheme onto a beginning or the end of another morphemes. In this agglutinating language, this kind of language is called agglutinating language. It's relatively clear what all individual morphemes are that make up a word. In other languages, morphemes may blend together more and obscure the distinction between one morpheme and another. Further, linguists have identified different types of word building rules that language may use. For example, till now we have become acquainted with isolating and agglutinating languages. But for example, we have other kind of languages. For example, one type of rule that is familiar to speakers of English. English is adding a non-word morpheme to the end of another morpheme called suffixation. Suffixation is non-word morpheme. A morpheme which does not have meaning is called non-word morpheme. In English, we can see a different range of words which is made by adding these non-word morphemes or grammatical morphemes to the end of another morpheme. We call it suffixation. A rule that is not so far familiar to English speaker is a reduplication, in which one morpheme is repeated. Reduplication is another process in which, as I've told, one morpheme is repeated. So, for example, in English, we make a word plural by suffixation. What the suffixation here is adding an S to the end of things we want to make plural. But in Indonesian, the plural is formed by repeating part of words, not but just by adding a suffix. By repeating part of words. For example, the singular form of the word house is rumah in Indonesian language, but the plural is rumah. A repetition of one word shows its plural form. While words are clearly formed using rules of various types, not the case that every word may follow the same rule. Notice that even setting aside differences in phonology that we discussed earlier, English doesn't always form a plural in the same way. We've actually got several plural forms. In English, every word do not change into its plural form just by adding a s to the end of singular. But we've got several plural forms. Some words like, for example, child or ox are made plural with another suffix. For example, child became children, ox, oxen. Other words made plural by changing the word, for example, man into men, just by changing a vowel sound, a into a, man, men. While still others don't actually appear to change. For example, dear and dear, both the plural and the singular form are both the same here in the case of dear. Yet by and large, it appears that adding s is default rule in English. New words in English are most likely to have s added to make a plural version. There are important and interesting historical reasons for how this situation has come to be, but the key implication that has driven a lot of research on word formation is that we effectively have two systems. A rule-based system in which plural is formed by adding s. So we call it rule-based. It means it is based on rules. And then a set of historical exceptions, which are stored how in our mental dictionary called lexicon. We have just memorized this form. For example, we have memorized that man's plural form is man, or child plural form is children. We have just memorized or put this information within our, for example, lexicon. This is a controversial idea. But let's to one of the big questions of language processing. The question is, do people build words from morphemes and word building rules in real time as they speak or hear them? Or are words stored as whole units in our mental dictionaries? This is a question. Do people build words from morphemes and word building rules in real time as they speak? Or no? In the other side, the question is, are words stored as a whole units in our mental dictionaries? So far, anyway, to answer these questions, for example, after reading these questions, so for example, when we hear cats, do you look up cat and S in your lexicon? Or do you have an entry for cats, that is separate form of entry for cat? It means, do you have two, in fact, entry for these two words, cat and cats? The short answer appears to be that we do both. It depends. Both cases are possible. In some cases, we can say we have, in fact, plural form, or we have a morpheme units in our mind and then combine them together in order to create a new meaning. And also at the same time, we have stored the word like a single unit in our mental dictionary. Both of them are possible. The answer to these questions is that both of them. It depends on frequency of words and the type of morpheme involved. A number of researchers have also successfully shown computation, for example, computationally, I can say, it's better to say computationally. It means by computation, by calculating, by counting. Computationally, that one does not need to divide the lexicon strictly between rules and exceptions to those rules in order to account for how language appears to works. Instead, it may well be that our word processing system is sensitive to regularities of all kinds between the forms of different words, which would allow us to account for the fact that while people usually apply the parent default rule to new words, if the word resembles an irregular word, people may use exceptional rules. The regular past tense in English, for example, is formed by adding ed to the end of words. But if we give people a new word like, for example, fring or fringe, and ask them to make it past tense, they may say fringed, or fringed. As in, for example, yesterday I had fringe, but they may also say frong. Okay, both form. Frong instead of fring. Found. Okay. They may also say frong, F-R-U-N-G, instead, because fringe sound a lot like some other words, for example, sing. If a speaker found a resemblance between fring and sing, may create frong to create to express the past tense. Sing, song, fring, frong. Bring, it's based on the resemblance between sing and bring with fring. that doesn't add ed for the past, but rather change the vowel. It's just by comparison and based on the similarities. Both cases are possible, but the default form is in priority, and most of the speakers prefer to create plural form just by adding plural s to the singular form. Okay, here we talk about word structures, which is the domain of morphology. In the next topic, we are talking about sentence structure. Words including their internal sounds and structures. And the next step, they are crucial to language. They are a very key element in language. But language doesn't occur as just a set of isolated words. Language is not a set of isolated words, but instead a words put together in systematic, rule-governed ways. Further, at this level, language is built in a hierarchy way such that words can be grouped together into phrases. Words come together, make larger units that we call it phrase. And then phrases combine together to create a larger unit that we call it sentence. Syntax is the study of how sentence or sentences are made or are formed. This is an important part of language for psycholinguistics researchers because it poses many questions about how people understand this grouping of words. How we combine words together in order to create a larger unit and finally to express a specific meaning which is inside our mind. The next topic is rules for creating phrase. What kind of rules is applied by a speaker for creating phrase? Rules for creating phrase generally apply at the level of type of words rather than particular individual words. So, rules apply to things like noun and verbs, not to particular words like dog and eat. However, properties of individual words can and do play an important role in sentence processing as well. We can break a sentence down into smaller connected phrases. For example, we can take the sentence like this and break it down. The example is, the artist bought a paintbrush. The artist bought a paintbrush. This is a simple sentence. First, there are two noun phrases in this simple sentence. The artist and a paintbrush. There are rules that establish how a phrase can and can't be made in particular language. In English, one part of the rule of making noun phrase is that the article, for example, the or the determiner, the, and, comes before a noun. A noun, it means a noun plus an article or determiner create a larger unit that we call it noun phrase. Importantly, for English, there is no rule that allows the article to follow its noun. In English, no articles can come of the noun. So here, this is a rules of combination. It is not grammatical English to say artist the. It's better to say the artist. Even though in other languages it can occur or it can be the case. But in English it's forbidden and you are not allowed to use determiner after a noun. So this is a rule. Next, we can create a verb phrase or VP by combining a verb, for example, bought, with a noun phrase to follow it. Bought a paintbrush. Here means bought is a verb, it's a head of verb phrase, and a paintbrush, which is a noun phrase. Here again, the order matters in English, and it would not be grammatical to put this noun phrase before a verb. In English, this noun phrase, which is an object, must come after a verb. In English, we can't say that the artist is the artist a paintbrush brought. It means, however, again, this could be grammatical in other languages, but now we are talking about a specific kind of language and its own rules. To bring up an important point, language researchers are generally not interested in how people should speak, but rather how they actually do what they perform. And so the rules of syntax or grammar of a language, researchers are not able to style, but rather they are intended to capture the fact about how people actually speak. Once again, what linguistics to understand is not your 8th grade English teacher's grammar. And the next topic or the title is grouping and liking phrase. As with the sound of language, some things that initially seems pretty straightforward gets complicated fairly quickly. The sound of language combines together by means of some rules and created a larger unit which we call it words. Now we have become acquainted with another rules which combine the words and morphemes together in order to create a larger unit that we call it phrase. And phrases again combined together and became a sentence. Anyway, first, it is not always clear how to combine or group phrases together. Sometimes it's ambiguous, like in following example. The policeman watched the tourist with the binoculars. There is an ambiguity in this sentence. Who has binoculars? Police or the tourist? This is the ambiguity of this sentence. It's not clear from a sentence. They could belong to the tourist, or the policeman could be using them to do the watching. The policeman used the binocular to do the watching, or the tourist uses the binoculars. There is an ambiguity here. This ambiguity means that there are actually two possible structures for a sentence, one in which the binocular are grouped with tourists. For example, the policeman watched the tourist with a binocular. Here we have a different grouping, and one in which the other paraphrase is they are grouped with the verb watch. The police watch with binocular the tourist. A big question for language processing is how people decide which interpretations to pick as the, for example, when they hear or read a sentence. We will explore this question in detail in the chapter 4. Another puzzle is how people are able to link up phrases even when they are not right next to each other. In fact, this brings up an obvious question. What does it mean? It means that all the phrases in English are not in a sequence. Sometimes there is some things between an element of the same phrase, and there is a distance, in other words, between the different part of phrase. But how the speakers can find out the different part of the phrase and omit this distance in order to grasp the meaning. In fact, this brings up obvious questions. Why not just think of a sentence as a word strung together? Why use phrase at all? Why there is a phrase in a language? There are actually lots and lots of reasons to think that sentences are organized by phrase. Books and books words, in fact. Let's just look quickly at some example that shows why we need phrase. And why in languages uses the phrase. There is a rule in English that the subject, for example, this is a fixed rule. A subject of a sentence and its verbs are linked such that a form of verb verb change to agree a number with its subject. There is an agreement between subject and verb. For example, the artist wants to borrow, but the artists want to borrow, for example, some money from Mary. The things to notice here is that the verb want either has is or not, and that what determines when the verbs should have is whether the subject artist is singular or plural. For example, the following sentences are grammatical English because the verb disagrees in number. The standard convention in linguistics and psycholinguistics is to mark ungrammatical sentences with asterisks at the beginning. If there is a sentence which is ungrammatical, we'll put an asterisk at the beginning of that sentence, which shows that this sentence is, for example, ungrammatical. The artists want to borrow is ungrammatical sentence because there is not a proper agreement between the subject and verb. But this is not enough to convince anyone that we need phrase. Why we need phrase? So what happens when the subject gets a little more complicated in that sentence? Instead of artist, for example, in that example we can extend the subject. The artist that Mary once met at a party. All of this phrase may become the subject. Wants to borrow some money from her. Here the verb want still needs to agree with the number of artists. The artist that Mary once met at a party wants. Again, there is an agreement between want and the artist. Not with Mary or with party. Of course, all of these nouns are singular, and so it's actually not clear. Just form this. It's not clear here from this example whether this is true, but we can look at our version of this sentence. The artists that Mary once met at a party want to borrow. In this example, we have a grammatical sentence. The artists want. The artist is a subject and want is a verb. Anyway, by looking at 4 versions of sentences that you can see within your book, we can see that the same rule applies, and it's the main noun called the head noun of a phrase and counts, not any of intervening nouns, not even one that occurs right before a verb. So the verb is not agreeing with noun closest to it, but verb agreeing with a noun that is charged for a whole noun phrase. It means there is agreement between verb and head noun. If you have a noun phrase, there are so many elements that have been added to the core noun. But the agreement between subject and verb is the agreement between the head noun in a subject and a verb in its main position. The key question of language processing are how the words and phrases in a sentence are linked together in a meaningful way. How the words come together in order to express a meaning, and how the structure of sentence gets built, both by speakers and comprehenders or listeners. The next topic is meaning. What is meaning? What is meaning here? The field of semantics is concerned with meaning. When I'm talking about meaning, I'm dealing with semantics. In a language, it can be divided into 2 major parts: lexical and prepositional. Lexical meaning, prepositional meaning. Lexical semantic focus on word meaning. When I say lexical semantic, I focus on word meaning. For example, the meaning of the word cat. Propositional semantics, on the other side, focus on meaning of sentence or sentences. How we know who did what when we encounter the sentence like the cat sat on the mat. In both cases, there has been a debate about what language refers to. Does it refer to a real word or to representations of a real word that we have in our mind? Psycholinguistics has adapted a latter view. Word and sentence refer to representation of real word that we carry in our head. Word and sentence, in fact, convey the meaning in our head. This means that in order to understand meaning in a language from a psycholinguistics perspective, we need to know what these, in fact, mental representation are like and how language links them together. So, in this book, we'll focus largely on lexical semantics, addressing the nature of meaning of concept and their links to language in chapter 5. But we will also consider how the meaning of a sentence and individual words may be linked to larger dynamic representation of situation, which is the topic of chapter 6. Another big question in lexical semantics is that we will discuss is how people get to write the meaning of words when there is more than one. If someone talks about going to bank, how do we know whether they are headed for a financial situations or financial institution or down to the river? Which one? Banks has two different meaning. So how we can grasp the meaning clearly, and how do we know whether they are headed to institutional or financial institution or down to a river? We will address this in the next chapter 2. The next title is real word use. I will keep the topic here, and for the next session we will talk about the real word use. Thank you very much. Thanks for your attention. Please read this part carefully and take it easy to contact me. There is no problem if you have any ambiguity or questions. I will be happy to answer your questions. Have a nice time.